YouTube, we're back. This is part 2 of the assembly of the EZIO 1500 millimeter EP, which is by HobbyKing. And where we left off last, we were kind of fighting getting the adjustment done on the rudder, the mechanical adjustment to get it square. And so what we're doing now is we're just getting ready to put this back in. I gave it one more turn and we're just about as perfect as we need to be, really. What I've run into now is that this covering is wanting to poke out funny because it's delaminated. In fact, I'm going to give this one more turn and see if it'll let me take it. So because it's delaminated, I have to go ahead and try to reattach that film, that covering film. Yeah, we're perfectly square now. Okay, so... And if you guys were keeping track, that's like, what, 5 turns we had to do?
Yeah, I think so.
So we have to push this down, and we have to heat it. So I'm too lazy to go get my... iron. So what we're going to do is we're going to cheat, and we're going to heat up the side of this. The screwdriver will stay warm for a second, but we don't want to melt it, okay? Smell it for heat. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to touch it right there. And just let it heat that back down, guys. See how it's pushing it down? So now this spot here, same thing, just a little bit different position. You see, all we're doing is we're just heating that adhesive up so that it'll stick down. And this is just going to be tucked in. The only reason it's pulled up is because we had to do it 14 times. Okay, now we're going to heat this back up. Don't even need it that hot. And then we're going to come back in here and just push that down, that covering. And that's going to just hold that down for us. And then on this side, we didn't hardly have any. We just had one corner that popped up. You see what I'm doing there, guys? Just kind of pulling that covering film down to the edge and just letting the heat reactivate the adhesive. Okay, so now we're going to try to put this in without that stuff peeling back up on us if we can avoid it. Yep, it went in without peeling. That's what we were hoping for, guys. Okay, so now this is in here. This is in here. But at this point, let's just make sure everything works. Elevator's up, elevator's down. Left and right is actually in the correct orientation, which is pretty cool. The trouble is, and I'll be totally honest with you guys, we aren't going to have very much up elevator. Look at this. See how quick we run into the rudder? That's not very cool. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can manage this. One, I don't want to give up rudder, period. I don't like giving up rudder. Rudder's very important. However, elevator is really usually not a big deal. But if we're doing flap-ons and flaps, sometimes you need to be able to exaggerate those a little bit. The other thing I'm noticing is that my elevator clevis is cocked at an angle. While I'm not all glued together, I'm going to try to exaggerate that to the extent that it'll square up. It's not wanting to do it, though. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's going in like this. And I want it to be square so it doesn't create drag on that linkage all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this out. I'm just using my fingernail to lift. Okay, so once that's out, I'm going to pull the opposite side. Okay, now you see what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to give this twist. Yeah, that ain't going to work. And go this way. Just overdo it just slightly. Okay, now it's square. Now it's square, guys. You see how that's sort of not getting that lateral force on it? Okay, so stick that in and clip that back in. Okay, good. So it's clipped back in. So our options become, one, we can either trim out the elevator by actually cutting the elevator. That's not really an option because look where our control arm is. It's coming right into the middle of that control surface. So what we have to do is we basically would have to cut part of the rudder away right where it's touching, okay? Which I actually don't have a problem with that at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look really close at where that hit, and I'm going to make a mark with my X-Acto knife. Okay? And I'm doing this before we get it all assembled. Now, of course, the directions say to have a certain amount of throw and blah, 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 whatever. I want more. So, even if I never use it, I don't care. I don't want this to be one of the issues I run into. Okay? So just triple checking again here for where it's going to hit. Yep, so it's just beyond there. So I'm basically just going to cut a relief here. Going to be a very small relief. Can you pause it?
Okay.
Now there's one big compromise when doing this. I'm going to have to pull this off, guys. So let me go ahead and pull this off and we'll give you guys a better view of it. One big compromise here is that, man, that thing is just, I hate those clevis adapters. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to cut this over here, right there, that little notch. Okay, so let's find something we can lay this on and cut. In the light, you have to come.
Okay.
If you get lucky the way you cut this out, what will happen is you can fold the monocoat or whatever coat they use, Ultra Coat or whatever brand they used, from the other side to cover up this unfinished edge. But like I was saying earlier, I'm less concerned about the finish and more concerned about the function of this. This is a primary control surface. So it's very critical that you get this free if you intend to keep that amount of throw. Now, if you go by what the manual says, you won't need this much throw, but I usually want more throw than what the manual says anyway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and tip this back. You see the monocoat's still there, guys. So now what we can do is we can, well, no matter what size we end up making this, we're going to cut like this, 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 this. That one fell off, dang it. And what we can do is we can now take and heat that back up with our screwdriver to reattach it. So we'll do that now with the torch and just the screwdriver. Ironically enough, you probably wouldn't want to use an iron for this because it's going to be too small to get your iron into this area. So just heat that up, and then you can take your screwdriver, just kind of force those into the area there, and then that'll stick down for you. Okay, so we're just gonna, I need to heat this up just a little bit. Okay. Okay, so that's there. And that one little piece that fell off, we don't really care about. We can peel that extra white off of there if we needed to. But we'll deal with that when we need to, so. So now we're going to reattach this wing. You pause it for a second.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're just going to try putting this back in. Make sure you're lined up there. Make sure, try not to pull the monocoat off if you can avoid it. And sneak that forward. Now, checking the elevator clearing. Okay, so we're very, very close. We got about the right cut. We just need to take a little teeny bit more. So we'll pause it and get this thing out so we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, so we're just taking a little bit more of this material here, guys. We thought maybe we had it all the way, but we weren't quite enough. Okay, so we're just going to take a little bit more. Just be careful that you don't take all your material here, because you need to have some strength to receive that control arm there. Okay? And we're not even going to worry about the covering this time because it's going to be screwed up anyway.
Okay.
All right, so we had an issue with our camera, so sorry about the delay there. Basically what we had to do was we cut a notch to make room for the elevator throw. Now, obviously it's not going to be able to go 100% up, but basically we cut the notch and then I took it and just sanded the inside edge. It's not really rocket science or anything. So that's 100% of what we're going to be able to do. So just looking at the radio now, if you go into, if I scroll over one, I can see where the position is before it hits. It looks like we're at like 65% roughly. So if I go to servo setup and I go to travel for elevator and I pull up on it, whoops. So I can bring that so that it'll only ever go up. Let's call it, let's see if 65 is enough. So then I pull up and it stops. Now, while it's stopped, I can move the rudder. See? The rudder's wanting to get moved around a little bit. So we'd have to go to like, instead of 65, we'll go to like 60, okay? So we're holding it down. We pull all the way back, and then while we're doing that, we can try to move the rudder. And we should be really close to clearing. It may not be perfect, but we can always back off the throw a little bit more on this. So, you see how it says 60, guys? We may need to back it off to like that. Now, in order to change the other side, you just move the stick up, and then you can, generally on a control surface like this, I want to try to make the throw up and down about the same, okay? So now that we've got that done, we can go ahead and reassemble the wing. One thing I did while we were off camera, waiting for the battery to get charged up a little bit, I installed one of these aileron control arms. And the reason I wanted to show you this, because this is kind of weird, I also learned something about our other linkages. Those can be loosened and tightened right here. There isn't actually a set screw in the backside. See, it's hollow. So all you do is you basically tighten the screw and it bites, but it also positions it on the servo control arm, which I thought was weird. So that being said, we're going to put this one in real quick and I'll show you the one trick I had to do. Let's look at this one. In order to clear the aileron, I had to make a bend. Otherwise, this rod would actually hit at the full throw. So I'm going to do approximately the same amount, mirrored. See how it's mirrored? And I'm just going to go just like that. Okay? Approximately the same amount. Then we're going to come over here and we'll do it just the same way. Just going to loosen this screw that's hanging on. I'll slide it back. You have to take the screw completely out, and then you can feed your control arm into the servo, and then you just line this up, take the screw, you got to feed the screw into the wooden control arm. Okay, and that's coming off the aileron. So I just got like 2 turns in there. Dang it, I didn't have any turns. Keep having my light blocked. Doing it again. So now that we've tightened that, we have to kind of, it's not totally tight. We're just going to pinch this to keep the aileron control surface where it needs to be. And then I'm going to turn to tighten until it bites the actual rod. Now it's biting the rod. So then that completes the joint. And so as we manipulate the ailerons, both sides are allowed to move. Okay, so now that that's done, let's go ahead and we will get the wing attached, and then we can do our final glue. So as you can see, guys, it's not that this plane is hard to build, it's a lot of back and forth steps that you wouldn't expect. So these aileron lines, we're going to feed in here. Now we're not going to button this on yet. We're going to make sure all our control surfaces are going the right direction, because I have to take this off to get to the control surface adjustments on the Lemon RX receiver. Okay, so up, down. Now I can just kind of hold this in loosely. That's backward, okay? So I'm going to go into my servo setup, and I'm going to go reverse rudder, okay? So now that's correct. Okay, now my ailerons, that's incorrect. That's pointing down. I need that to go up. Okay, they're going backward, so we could go into right aileron, reverse, and left aileron. But you'll notice that the throw changed. So this is where I was talking about earlier. You may have to actually change which one's plugged into which. Did you see this, guys? Okay. I'm a little bit weirded out by the fact that that aileron is drooping so much right now. Are we hitting on the end here?
It sounds like it, but it doesn't look like it.
Really? It's just the decal. We'll have to heat it up and melt it back a little bit. So this is not the position I had hoped to have that in. I want it to be square and true. And I can feel it. It sounds like it's sticking. So now the other thing is we need to turn our stabilizer on and check the direction of travel there too. So left aileron and right aileron are both flipped now. So that's the correct direction. That's the correct direction. That's the correct direction, correct direction, correct direction. Now we're turning our stabilizer back on and all the way up. Okay, so the elevator should go up when I lift the tail. Up, aileron, wrong way, wrong way. Okay, so the aileron axis has to change. The yaw axis is correct though. So you can do this with whatever type of screwdriver you want, but sometimes using an X-Acto knife is the easiest. So you'll just come in here and you get to your Lemon RX receiver, and one of these is labeled. Okay, so we have one of these axis adjustments down here is gonna flip the ailerons, and it's really hard to see right now, so I have to try to get a light. So I'm gonna find a light and come right back. Okay, so elevator aileron, it's the bottom down switch. I'm just gonna flip one switch. You guys probably aren't gonna see it because it's too hard to see down there. I can barely see it in person. So now we're just temping this back in before we actually bolt it on. Stabilizer's turned all the way up so we can see the maximum output, okay? So now up is up, up is up, yaw axis is correct, up and down. Okay, great. So now we have everything set, so we should be able to go ahead and verify the correct roll axis, verify the elevator and rudder. Yep, so that's all correct. So stabilizer's back off for now. Now we can tighten this in. Make sure everything's positioned where it needs to be. And before we do that, guys, why don't we stick some foam in there to hold the stabilizer down. And when I say hold the stabilizer down, I'm literally talking about a chunk of foam that will just hold that thing in position. So let's pause it and I'll grab some. Okay, so I got some different types of foam that we could use. This stuff works really nice. It's got multiple layers, and so I can cut it up easy. But all I'm going to do is I really just need to stuff a little bit of this in here just to kind of hold it in place. It's not small enough to change its actual position. The receiver isn't. But that's going to be a little bit too thin. I like the size. I just need a little bit more thickness. You cut it with a 20,000 shim like I use all the time, or a knife. And all I'm going to do is just find a spot where I can stuff that down into. And there it is. That should be pretty much all we need to do. Now, if that pivots a little bit, that's not a huge issue. It's not great, but it's also not a huge issue, because it really doesn't matter that much if we have a little bit of a lateral pivot, so long as it's not pivoting live while we're flying. I don't suspect it's going to do that, so I think we're okay. There's one wire that I want to fall below the foam. Now, the other thing that this is going to do is this is going to get the wires away from the servos themselves. So what I want to do is I want to stuff these wires up into the wing, okay? And that's just going to help us to have a little bit better peace of mind that they're not going to flop out into the rudder servo or the elevator servo. And we're going to slide those two front keys in, and then we're going to take this thing, now that we're done with it, we've already established it works. Yeah, the big screwdriver, please. Thanks. So now we're just going to tighten this in. So if you want to pause it, we'll come right back when we're done tightening. Okay. All right, guys. So what we're going to do next is we're going to actually do our alignment test, where everything is loose together on the tail right now. And so what we can do is we can reposition the vertical stabilizer by tugging the horizontal stabilizer left and right. Can you see that in the video? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now the other thing is we don't want this so far off that it catches on the clevis. Okay, so I feel like that's a pretty good happy medium there. Now, you also want to make sure that this is all the way forward, okay? For maximum, it's seated in the saddle. And then I'm just eyeing down the middle. I need to go a little bit more to my right. Okay, so now that's pretty close. It's not perfect. We'll see if we can get a little bit more perfect. That looks really good there. That looks really square. 90 degrees true. And then I'm just sighting along the edge of the horizontal stab, and it looks square and true. And now the hard part is you actually have to glue this and make a commitment to that position. So I'm just double and triple checking here to make sure that we don't have any other asymmetry that we don't like. Because now's the time you get it right once. Now you could tape it there and do some more checking, but in my experience, I'm just going to overthink the heck out of it. So now I'm going to take my medium CA. I'm going to make sure I have my paper towel ready. Then I've got my kicker with the lid off, ready to spray. And then we're just going to go a little bit of glue up front, a little bit of kicker. And we're just going to let that set for a second. Double check our position. Push that over just a touch. And I'm basically just going to run a bead back. All the way back. I'm going to let it sit. One good sneeze of accelerant, kicker. We're just going to double check again for squareness. Okay, then we're going to just double check again for this squareness. Just one nice thick bead of CA. We already put kicker down, but we'll go ahead and do one more sneeze of kicker. Now that that's sitting for a second, we can start thinking about if there's any other adjustments to make, which there shouldn't be at this point. You're pretty much where you need to be. Now let's double check our elevator throw. Good. Rudder. Rudder. Full up. See, now we're not hitting anywhere along that whole sweep. Either direction, guys. We're really close right there. And then down is obviously not an issue. Okay? That's why we went through all that trouble on that one step where we were just trying to kind of square everything up. Now I should be able to tip this and get my bead in there. And then as soon as we're done here, we'll flip it upside down and do the underside as well. One big shot of kicker. Let that sit. Now, in my case, I'm going to reinforce this glue joint here with some extra kicker, because the nature of we weaken the structure just a little bit on the bottom. So you want to make sure we've got an extra contact point there. Okay, now time to triple check. Everything is really nice and square. Now we're going to flip it all the way upside down. We're going to real carefully do this part. Okay, and then now that we've got that glue on there, we'll give it some kicker. And then one last thing while we're at it. This is going to get destroyed by landings. And so I'm going to try to beef it up a little bit with some extra CA. Don't need to go crazy with it, but just enough to give it a little bit more to run on. We'll just let that sit for a second. So now, I gotta cap things off. Let's pause it. We'll let this sit for a second.
Okay.
All right, guys. So 49 millimeters is the CG. So I'm marking that right now. Okay, so 49 millimeters, which was easier to measure from the other side, from the leading edge. Now this side will go the other way. 49, right? Mm-hmm. There's 49 marked on either side. Now, one trick that I usually try to do is the drip of CA trick, which does work pretty good. I don't always do this, but it works really nice when you got a plane that's going to be needing to get checked more often than others. So, take and drip a drip of CA. Now you do this with hot glue if you wanted to. Give it a pretty reasonable size, okay? And then we're just going to give it one little teeny bit of kicker. And we're going to go right back in for another drip. And what's going to happen is that is going to give you a really good spot to check that you'll be able to feel them with your fingertip. as opposed to having to depend on seeing it. It's always hard to see these things. So now I'm having trouble controlling the spray, so I'll just pull the tip out and do that 2 or 3 more times, and we'll come right back and show you how it works.
Okay.
Okay guys, we're getting close to the end of the video here, and so I'm running out of memory, but I didn't want to forget to do this. We're just going to reinforce this whole reed, or whatever you want to call this, and then this area around it, okay? So now we're going to put the CA down like this, very simply, and then we're actually going to add some fibrous material to it. In this case, it's going to be as simple as just grabbing some of this paper towel, and this paper towel will actually give us some more material for strength, okay? It's going to reinforce that whole joint. And the idea here is that if we do this right, we'll actually end up with a whole lot more strength and hardly any extra weight on what should be a pretty light plane anyway. Okay, so we'll just push that down there. And all we're going to do is we're just going to now set that into the bed of CA that we laid out. And we'll just soak it again. It's almost like fiberglass, but it's not quite maybe as strong as fiberglass. Certainly a lot easier than doing an epoxy mix and all that. Okay, so once you get that soaked in, give it some kicker. Wrap the edges if you want, and you'll be surprised how strong that thing will be. And it's a lot stronger, not a little, it's a lot stronger now. So that's the only reinforcement I was thinking about doing yet. Now let's talk about CG. We got our 1250 milliamp pack in here. I'm going to just slide the battery all the way back. I'm going to put this canopy on, and then we're just going to take a look at this. That's about perfect CG for a glider. You don't want to have it so crazy nose heavy that the elevator can't keep up, but you also don't want it to be tail heavy at all. So let's pause it. So I cut a small little block, real similar to what we used for the around the receiver, and that's just going to position our battery for us so that it won't slam forward in the event of a crash. And that also keeps it positioned so the CG's about right. Okay, so we'll pop this on here, and then the last thing we got to do is throw a couple of decals on, and we have to get this aileron worked out. So we'll pause it for that and come right back.